Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Why Stomach Acid is Good for You. Natural Relief from Heartburn, Indigestion, Reflux and GERD. By Jonathan V. Wright, M.D., and Lane Leonard, Ph.D. Narrated by Matthew Boston. Publisher's note: in this audio edition, you will hear references to figures and tables present in the print and e-book formats of the book. Preface. Whistling Past the Graveyard. Stomach acid has little or no value to our health. We may not even need it for digestion. Therefore, what's the harm in turning off the acid pumps when our gastric juices start erupting into heartburn and acid indigestion? If it gets rid of the pain and discomfort, why not turn them off for the rest of our lives? Stomach acid. Who needs it? If this sounds silly, try not to laugh too hard, because it's what most doctors in this country believe. The conventional medical establishment in the United States, thanks in large part to hundreds of millions of advertising, research, and educational dollars spent by the pharmaceutical industry each year, has learned to fear the evil stomach acid dragon. How else to explain their zeal for pushing dragon-slaying acid suppressors on a public convinced it is drowning in its own internally produced acid bath? Acid-suppressing drugs are a more than $7 billion a year industry in the United States. Yet this unimaginably large franchise is built on a convenient deception that virtually eliminating acid from the stomach can only be good for us, and that it will have no consequences today or tomorrow, or 20 or 30 years from now, when we're still popping potent acid-suppressing pills to control our symptoms of hyperacidity. In this book, we emphasize some of the important, even essential roles that stomach acid plays in digestion. We describe how hydrochloric acid, secreted by special cells in the stomach's lining in response to a meal, is a key upstream link in a complex chain of events that culminates in the absorption of vital nutrients that make a long, healthy life possible. Break that chain by severing the acid link, and the downstream cascade of events required for proper digestion and the continuing health of the gastrointestinal GI system, as well as the rest of the body, will be severely impeded. We also ask an important question: what diseases can emerge when stomach acid secretion is too low for too long? We wish the forces that control conventional medicine would ask this question, but for the most part, they seem uninterested. The fact is, they don't really want to know the answer. There is simply too much invested in the myth of acid indigestion. Yet the consequences for our health of long-term acid reduction due to disease or aging, known as atrophic gastritis, have been well known for the better part of a century. What about long-term drug-induced acid suppression? Based on very limited FDA-approved trials, conventional medicine's practitioners and promoters feel comfortable pretending that everything's going to be all right for people taking acid-quenching drugs like Prilosec, Prevacid, and their even more powerful successors for 10, 20, or 30 years or longer, if they live that long. We think that those who choose to believe this myth have their heads buried firmly in the sand. These are powerful drugs that cause profound changes in the body's chemistry and physiology at a key juncture in the digestive process. They should not be taken casually. Yet the current trend, with the widespread promotion of acid-blocking drugs for ordinary heartburn, is promoting just that. When it comes to acid blockers, the conventional medical establishment, including groups like the American Medical Association, AMA, National Institutes of Health, NIH, the various specialty medical associations, for example, American College of Gastroenterology, ACG, and disease advocacy groups, for example, International Foundation for Functional Gastrointestinal Disorders, IFFGD, not to mention the two most powerful groups of all, the global pharmaceutical industry and its in-house enforcement agency. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA, are all whistling, in chorus, past the graveyard. At our peril, They ignore decades of research, clearly demonstrating that low stomach acid, whether caused by disease or drugs, is linked to a wide range of serious, chronic, so-called incurable diseases, some of which can be fatal. Just because serious problems have not appeared after only a few years of drug use, there's no guarantee we won't start seeing them and experiencing them in a few more years. Natural atrophic gastritis typically takes decades to progress to more serious conditions, such as ulcer or stomach cancer. Why should we expect acid-blocking drugs to be any different? If you or someone you love suffers from heartburn or other symptoms of gastric upset, we urge you to ignore the constant barrage of advertising that leads most people, including most doctors, to believe that the only way to treat this disorders is by suppressing acid secretion. More than a century's worth of scientific research confirms that this simply isn't so. What has come to be called, incorrectly, acid indigestion is almost always associated not with too much stomach acid, but with too little. In this book, we propose a natural program that in many cases can cure acid indigestion. Instead of drugs that merely suppress symptoms by disrupting normal GI function, we tell you how to use a variety of safe, natural, inexpensive substances that work with the body's physiology, not against it, to restore healthy gastric functioning, heal damaged tissue, prevent future disease, and perhaps extend your life. Prologue. The Gray Man. At Tahoma Clinic, he was known as the Gray Man. He got the nickname after Sue, the receptionist, and Barbara, the nurse, agreed that they'd never seen anyone with his skin tones. Anyone could see it. Although he was Caucasian, his visible skin was devoid of any pink tones. He scarcely had any brown hue. Instead, he was a peculiar whitish gray. I've not seen anyone with the same pigmentation before or since. The 61-year-old Gray Man hadn't come in because he was looking gray, although his wife had mentioned it to him a time or two. Actually, he explained, he didn't have any symptoms or illnesses. He was just plain tired. Really tired. Further questioning turned up little but the fatigue. In the past, he'd had chronic indigestion and intermittent but persistent heartburn. He noted that both symptoms had gone on for over 20 years, and that he'd taken plenty of those Tums and Rolaids and other antacids since his 40s. However, he reported he hadn't had any indigestion or heartburn problem at all since he'd started taking that new prescription acid blocker stuff, Tagamet, which he'd been taking every day since it came out in 1977. By the time he appeared at the clinic, he guessed he'd been taking the drug every day for 7 years. You know that stomachs are naturally designed to secrete enough acid to turn even large meals into the equivalent of soup? I asked. Yeah, I know that, I guess. But all my doctors told me that my indigestion and heartburn were due to too much acid. It just made good sense to take something that would knock down the excess acid, he replied. Did anyone ever actually measure the amount of acid in your stomach? No, but the symptoms sure have gone away since I started the Tagamet. And a river will dry up if we stop all the rain. Maybe that's an advantage for a little while if the river has been flooding. But what happens if we stop the rain permanently? He thought for a moment. Permanently? Well, 7 years at least. Quite a drought. Nothing will grow for sure. Right. And if we shut off or neutralize our stomach's natural acidity for more than brief intervals, there's bound to be consequences. First, we don't break down foods as well, and many nutrients, especially essential amino acids, certain minerals, and at least 2 B vitamins aren't as available as they're supposed to be. So they don't get absorbed into our bloodstreams, and our cells don't get the normal amounts of nutrients they need to keep them going. Second, when that acidified soup empties out of our stomachs into the upper part of the small intestine, the duodenum, it triggers the secretion of hormones that in turn stimulate the pancreas and gallbladder to make or release their own digestive secretions, including enzymes, bicarbonate, and bile. Without this acid trigger, these hormones are underproduced, and the subsequent stages in digestion don't work as well as they're supposed to either. This means that another whole group of nutrients becomes less available to our cells. So it's like a cascade of events, said the gray man, starting to catch on. If the acidity isn't there, then other parts of digestion aren't triggered properly either. Exactly. And there may be many other cascades in the digestive stream that we still don't know about that might be affected. No wonder I'm tired, he said. I've been literally drying up a lot of my digestion for years. Why didn't anyone tell me about this? Don't know. It's all right there in the basic textbooks for medical students. But that's not all. The same textbooks list a third consequence of low or no stomach acid production. Let's think about it this way. What happens if I add bacteria or parasites to an acid solution in a test tube? Not sure, but I'd guess a lot of them die. Right, they die. Textbooks of gastroenterology, the medical specialty that concentrates on the digestive system, actually refer to stomach acid as the acid barrier to intestinal tract infection. Also, everyone knows that farther down, the intestines are home to a wide variety of microorganisms, sometimes called intestinal microflora, literally tiny plants, which help with digestion, secrete a few important vitamins, and generally behave themselves. But if the acid-alkaline balance, technically called the pH, isn't just right, then many of these friendly microorganisms literally die out and are replaced by not-so-friendly germs. At best, these unfriendly microorganisms aren't as helpful to us as the friendly ones. At worst, some of them may excrete substances that are toxic to our own body cells, which are absorbed and spread all around our bodies. The gray man shifted uncomfortably in his chair. So, by keeping my stomach acid low to prevent heartburn, not only have I been semi-starving myself for the last 7 years, but also I may be encouraging toxins from my gut to enter my system? Afraid so. Could this be why I've been so tired all the time? Very likely. Let's work on restoring your normal digestion as much as possible. We'll try to make up for all those years of malnutrition, and if necessary, we'll do something to restore your normal gut flora. Then we'll see what happens with your fatigue. I guess the first thing is to stop this Tagamet, but then I'll have indigestion and heartburn all over again, won't I? There are natural ways we can try to stop indigestion and heartburn without blocking stomach acid. How? First, we need to find out if your stomach really is making too much acid. Chances are very high, over 90%, that the real culprit is likely underproduction of stomach acid. Heartburn means that some of that small amount of acid is turning up in the wrong place, causing the burning feeling. Let's wait until we do a test or two. Like the overwhelming majority of people with indigestion and heartburn, the gray man soon found that, although he had been suffering from heartburn for years, his stomach had actually been underproducing acid all that time. By replacing the missing stomach acid with capsules containing betaine hydrochloride, a safe, convenient, inexpensive source of stomach acid, or hydrochloric acid, HCl, and the digestive enzyme Pepcid with every meal, he was soon able to eliminate his symptoms. His program also included replacement digestive enzymes, intestinal flora normalizers, also called probiotics, and supplements of various amino acids, vitamins, and minerals that he had not been absorbing properly due to his low acid condition. Slowly but surely, his gray skin color returned to normal, healthy-looking brown and pink skin tones. His fatigue dissipated too, replaced by increasing energy. His wife also noted an improvement in his mood and attitude. 6 months later, he declared himself back to normal. The only thing entirely atypical about the gray man's, John's, case was his skin color. As noted, I've never seen anything like it before or since. But the rest of his story, indigestion and heartburn caused by underproduction of normal stomach acid, is absolutely typical. Since the 1970s, I've worked with literally thousands of individuals with one or another variation of the same story, indigestion and heartburn, frequently accompanied by bloating, belching, gas, constipation, occasionally loose bowels, caused by a failure or partial failure of normal stomach function. Stomach overfunction, or excess acid production, is actually quite rare. Most of these individuals had been compounding their health problems by taking antacids or acid-blocking drugs, either on their own or on the advice of healthcare practitioners. In the sections that follow, Dr. Leonard and I explain normal stomach function and what it does for us, and describe some of the many manifestations of stomach failure. We cover health problems commonly associated with poor stomach function. We describe conventional treatments for the mythical illness known as acid indigestion, and then the preferred natural alternatives. As you'll soon find, this is more than just another book about indigestion. For many of us, this is also a for-real guide to anti-aging and longevity. How can we expect our cells and our whole bodies to live long and well if they're chronically malnourished? For others, we offer a little-known perspective on a variety of diseases, including depression, diabetes, osteoporosis, rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, ulcerative colitis, acne rosacea, multiple sclerosis, childhood asthma, and many others that often improve once digestive function is normalized. So why haven't more of us heard about this before? Here's a small clue. The market for antacids and acid-blocking drugs amounts to more than $7 billion per year. The actual facts about digestive failure are literally drowned in the sea of advertising and patent medicine, pharmaceutical, industry-sponsored research designed to sustain the profits made from this superficial and profoundly misguided treatment of indigestion, heartburn, and accompanying symptoms. For the true story, we invite you to continue on. Chapter 1. The Myth of Acid Indigestion. Heartburn, indigestion, dyspepsia, and acid indigestion are extremely common afflictions, thanks mostly to diet and lifestyle, and sometimes because of genetics, pregnancy, anatomy, or simple aging. It seems that sooner or later, almost everybody gets an upset stomach in one form or another. Who hasn't felt the acute burning in the back of the throat and upper chest after eating certain foods? Who hasn't popped a Tums or gulped a bicarb to extinguish the acidic flames that seem to roar up from the stomach during a heartburn attack? A Gallup poll found that 44% of the U.S. population suffers from heartburn at least once a month, and 7% experience it weekly. According to the National Institute of Diabetes and Kidney Digestive Diseases, 60 million people experience heartburn at least once a month, and 25 million feel the burn every day. If we are to believe what we see in the media, the American populace is awash in indigestion-causing stomach acid. We can't watch TV, especially the evening newscasts, without seeing dozens of slick commercials for expensive, high-tech drugs like Prilosec, Prevacid, Tagamet, Zantac, Pepcid, Axid, and others, not to mention more traditional low-tech remedies like Tums, Rolaids, Maalox, and Alka-Seltzer. All of these products are designed to eliminate heartburn pain by reducing the amount of acid in the stomach. The old-fashioned antacid remedies simply neutralize any acid present in the stomach, taking the acidic bite out of it, thus rendering it temporarily harmless. One popular neutralizing antacid used to advertise that it soaked up 47 times its weight in excess stomach acid. The more advanced drugs work by squelching the production of acid at its source. The drug most commonly prescribed for heartburn today, Prilosec, virtually eliminates acid in the stomach around the clock, a fact that is proudly promoted in the drug's widespread consumer-oriented advertising. Prevacid, Acifex, Protonix, and Nexium do about the same thing. The myth that underlies the conventional treatment of acid indigestion and the implied message in all these commercials, although they rarely come right out and say it, is that heartburn happens because we've got too much acid in our stomachs. As a result, some of that acid flows back, or refluxes, into the esophagus, the muscular tube that carries food from the back of the mouth into the stomach. Since acid does not belong in the esophagus, its presence irritates the delicate tissue that lines the inside of the tube. Heartburn pain is a symptom of that irritation. If we've got heartburn or other symptoms of the more serious disorder, gastroesophageal reflux disease, GERD, the commercial message is clear. The less acid we have in our stomachs, the better. To most physicians, it is common knowledge that heartburn and other symptoms of acid indigestion are signs of too much stomach acid. To relieve the pain, we need merely reduce the level of acid. If we believe this, it makes sense that we should all be using these powerful acid-reducing treatments to relieve our heartburn. According to the manufacturers of these products, long-term acid suppression is an advantage, allowing us to control heartburn around the clock, perhaps with a single pill. But as we explain in this book, this kind of extreme heartburn protection may come at a cost to health that is being ignored by the pharmaceutical companies that patent and profit from these drugs, and ignored by the Food and Drug Administration, FDA, which collects truly enormous sums of money to approve them. Most importantly, perhaps, the cost to health of these drugs is being ignored by the thousands of physicians who prescribe them. They fail to recognize that the acid suppression theory, which currently governs the conventional medical therapy of acid indigestion, is seriously flawed because it is based on the myth that acid indigestion, heartburn, and its more serious consequence, GERD, are the result of too much stomach acid. The facts say otherwise. Consider this conveniently overlooked observation. The incidence of indigestion, simple heartburn, and GERD increases with age, while stomach acid levels generally decline with age. If too much acid were causing these problems, teenagers should have frequent heartburn, while grandma and grandpa should have much less. Of course, as everyone knows, exactly the opposite is generally true. We are led to believe that if we simply have other feelings of indigestion, like that overfull feeling with excess gas, bloating, or belching, but perhaps only a little heartburn, this is also due to too much acid. If this is true, then answer this question. Why is too much acid so efficient at refluxing back into the esophagus, but so inefficient at actually digesting food? It is simply a matter of common sense. How many of us can run faster at age 40 than at age 20? How many have better vision at 50 than at 30? We all experience declining hormone levels as we grow older. We can think of literally dozens of examples of functions that decline naturally with age. So why should the output of acid by the stomach run in the opposite direction? Science has confirmed what common sense tells us. For most of this century, medical researchers have repeatedly and consistently documented an age-related decline in stomach acid. So if we have less and less stomach acid as the years add up, why do we get more and more heartburn and indigestion? And more importantly, why are we treating that heartburn and indigestion by taking drugs that wring the last few drops of acid out of our stomachs? What's so bad about depleting stomach acid? Lots. Unfortunately, conventional medical wisdom refuses to recognize this, which suits the makers of acid-depleting drugs just fine. The problem is that many of the adverse effects associated with long-term suppression of stomach acid may take years or even decades to develop. At the same time, clinical trials of most drugs, which might expose these problems, generally last only a few months. A year is a long time in the world of clinical trials, and the number of people who take these drugs during these trials is relatively small. Once clinical trials end and a drug is approved by the FDA, monitoring of adverse side effects tends to be relatively haphazard, usually depending on doctors taking the trouble to file reports to the FDA. If a side effect is not immediately and obviously linked to stomach or digestive function, it will probably never get reported. Regrettably, many of the potential accompaniments of long-term acid suppression, including asthma, allergies, skin disorders, rheumatoid arthritis, insomnia, osteoporosis, gastrointestinal GI infection, depression, and many, many others can take years or even decades to develop. They would seem to have nothing to do with stomach acid and therefore would rarely, if ever, be reported. GERD, the serious side of heartburn. It wasn't too long ago that heartburn was viewed as largely a nuisance, something we joked about, put up with, blamed on mother's cooking. Today, heartburn is widely seen by the medical profession as the primary symptom of a potentially dangerous medical condition known as gastroesophageal reflux disease, or GERD. This shift in attitude has been driven in part by new research and partly by the availability and marketing of new drugs and surgical procedures. GERD is not really a disease per se, but more like a syndrome consisting of one or more of these disorders. Damage to the esophageal lining that may or may not produce symptoms. Mild to severe inflammation of the delicate lining of the esophagus. Symptoms such as heartburn, belching, upset stomach, bloating and/or gas, sense of fullness, particularly when accompanied by chronic cough, regurgitation of stomach contents, hoarseness, wheezing or asthma, difficulty swallowing, or sore throat. When heartburn occurs regularly for months or years, it is said to be chronic. People with chronic heartburn may have damage to their esophageal lining, especially the lower end of the esophagus, that begins as mild irritation, but may end up with scarring, constriction, ulceration, and ultimately, in a very small percentage of people, cancer. This is why intermittent or minor heartburn should never be allowed to become chronic. Although GERD occurs only in a minority of people who have heartburn, given the potential danger of chronic heartburn, today's acid-trumping treatments would seem to be among modern medicine's more important, if underappreciated, marvels. GERD appears to have met its match in these potent drugs that not only relieve heartburn, but promise to protect us against more serious, even life-threatening conditions. It's no wonder they have become among the best-selling drugs ever produced. Indigestion/heartburn/GERD is a multi-billion-dollar cash cow for the pharmaceutical industry. In the United States alone, we spent more than $7 billion on them in 1999. Prilosec alone accounted for more than half of that, $4 billion, nearly doubling its sales from the previous year. Indigestion and heartburn are not caused by too much stomach acid. As you might have guessed, we think there's something dreadfully wrong with this rosy financial picture. We wonder why so much of humanity is going to such great lengths to rid itself of all that annoying stomach acid, when very few of us ever consistently has too much acid in our stomachs, and when, except for a few rare conditions, heartburn is hardly ever associated with too much stomach acid. Chronic heartburn sufferers often have their stomachs and esophaguses examined via X-rays and gastroscopes, fiber optic tubes that allow the doctor to look inside the stomach and even take pictures. But in my 30 years of medical practice, not one person who's had these procedures done elsewhere has ever told me that they have also had careful measurements made of their stomach acid production. When we actually measure stomach acid output under careful, research-verified conditions, the overwhelming majority of heartburn sufferers are found to have too little stomach acid production. Yes, you heard that correctly. Heartburn almost never signals too much acid, and it may often be associated with too little. This is no secret. This is a well-documented but little appreciated medical fact. It has been confirmed in the scientific literature repeatedly and frequently throughout the last 100 years. The pharmaceutical companies, who make all those potent acid-suppressing anti-heartburn medications, know that heartburn and GERD are not caused by too much acid. Their researchers are very smart, and they read the scientific literature. They are well aware of the kinds of stomachs their drugs are going into. That's why their ads almost never actually come out and state that heartburn is a proven result of too much acid. Still, the message comes through loud and clear. If stomach acid causes heartburn, then less acid must be.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?